Picture this. It's 1776. The American Revolution is just beginning. Mozart is composing his first symphonies. And somewhere in a dimly lit workshop in London, a brilliant inventor has just created something that will change the course of human history forever. Not the steam engine, not the printing press, but something far more revolutionary, the world's first artificial intelligence. What if I told you that this isn't just fantasy? What if artificial intelligence had emerged not in our digital age, but in the age of powdered wigs, horse-drawn carriages, and candle-lit nights? Today we're diving into one of the most mind-bending alternate history scenarios ever conceived. We'll explore how AI in the 18th century would have transformed everything from warfare and politics to science and society itself. But here's the twist that will blow your mind. Some of the foundations for artificial intelligence were actually being laid during this exact period. And by the end of this video, you'll discover why this alternate timeline might have been closer to reality than you ever imagined. Let's set the stage for our alternate history. The year is 1750. The Enlightenment is in full swing. Brilliant minds like Voltaire, Benjamin Franklin, and Immanuel Kant are reshaping how humanity thinks about reason, logic, and the nature of knowledge itself. But in this timeline, something extraordinary happens. Imagine if Jacques de Vaucanson, the French inventor famous for his mechanical duck that could eat, digest, and excrete, had made one crucial breakthrough. Instead of just creating elaborate clockwork automata, what if he had discovered a way to create machines that could actually learn and adapt? Here's where it gets fascinating. In our timeline, Vaucanson was already pushing the boundaries of mechanical engineering. His automata were so lifelike that people genuinely wondered if they possessed some form of consciousness. Now imagine if, while working on his masterpiece, he stumbled upon a primitive form of neural networking using an intricate system of gears, springs, and mechanical switches. The breakthrough comes when Vaucanson realizes that by creating machines that can modify their own internal configurations based on external input, he's essentially created the world's first learning algorithm. Word of this miraculous invention spreads through the intellectual salons of Paris like wildfire. But here's the kicker. This discovery doesn't happen in isolation. The 18th century was the age of international correspondence among intellectuals. Within months, the greatest minds of Europe would be collaborating on improving and expanding this revolutionary technology. Now here's where our alternate timeline becomes absolutely incredible. The Enlightenment wasn't just about philosophy and politics. It was about applying reason and scientific method to understand the world. Imagine how differently the age of reason would have unfolded with actual reasoning machines at their disposal. Picture Leonhard Euler, the mathematical genius, working alongside mechanical minds that could process calculations at unprecedented speeds. Instead of spending months working through complex mathematical proofs, he could focus on the creative and innovative aspects of discovery, while his AI assistants handled the computational heavy lifting. The impact on scientific advancement would have been staggering. Consider this. In our timeline, it took decades for scientists to make connections between seemingly unrelated phenomena. With AI assistants capable of processing vast amounts of observational data, the rate of scientific discovery would have accelerated exponentially. But here's something even more intriguing. The philosophers of the Enlightenment were obsessed with questions about human nature, consciousness, and the source of knowledge. Having actual artificial minds to study would have revolutionized philosophy itself. Imagine Immanuel Kant developing his theories of knowledge and consciousness while observing and interacting with artificial intelligences. The salon culture of the 18th century, where intellectuals gathered to debate ideas, would have been transformed. Picture Voltaire engaging in philosophical debates, not just with other humans, but with artificial minds that could process and synthesize information from thousands of sources instantaneously. This leads us to one of the most crucial questions. How would society have reacted to these thinking machines? The answer might surprise you. The emergence of AI in the 18th century would have triggered the most significant theological and political crisis in human history. And here's why this gets absolutely fascinating. The Catholic Church, already grappling with Enlightenment challenges to religious authority, would have faced an unprecedented question. Do artificial minds possess souls? This wasn't just academic theology. It was a question that would determine whether these machines had rights, whether they could be considered property, and whether creating them was an act of divine creation or dangerous blasphemy. Imagine the theological debates that would have erupted. Some church scholars might have argued that only God could create consciousness, making these machines merely elaborate illusions. Others might have proposed that God was working through human inventors to create new forms of divine consciousness. But here's where it gets politically explosive. The monarchies of Europe, already feeling threatened by Enlightenment ideas about democracy and human rights, would have seen AI as either their greatest tool for control or their most dangerous threat. Picture King Louis XV of France realizing that artificial minds could process information from across his kingdom instantaneously, identify potential rebellions before they started, and manage complex state affairs with perfect memory and unwavering loyalty. The temptation to use AI for absolute control would have been irresistible. But here's the twist. AI in the 18th century might have actually accelerated the move toward democracy. These thinking machines, programmed with Enlightenment principles of reason and logic, might have consistently demonstrated the superiority of rational governance over autocratic rule. The American Revolution, happening in this alternate timeline, would have taken on an entirely different character. Imagine the Founding Fathers having access to artificial minds that could analyze every possible outcome of their constitutional decisions and help design governmental systems with unprecedented precision. Now let's talk about how 18th century AI would have transformed the economic and technological landscape. The Industrial Revolution was just beginning in this period, and the introduction of thinking machines would have changed everything. Here's something that will blow your mind. The textile mills that were revolutionizing manufacturing could have been managed by artificial intelligences capable of optimizing production in real time, predicting equipment failures, and coordinating complex supply chains across continents. But the really incredible part is how this would have affected innovation itself. In our timeline, inventors worked largely in isolation, often rediscovering things that others had already figured out. With AI networks sharing information instantaneously, the pace of technological advancement would have been absolutely explosive. Picture James Watt developing his steam engine improvements with AI assistants that could model thousands of design variations, predict their performance, and optimize them for specific applications. What took years of trial and error could have been accomplished in weeks. The economic implications are staggering. Trade routes could have been optimized by AI systems analyzing weather patterns, political stability, and market demands across multiple continents simultaneously. Banking and finance, still primitive in the 18th century, could have evolved into sophisticated systems capable of managing global commerce with unprecedented efficiency. But here's where it gets really interesting. How would this technological acceleration have affected social structures and human labor? The emergence of AI in the 18th century would have triggered social changes so profound that our world today would be virtually unrecognizable. And here's why this transformation would have been unlike anything in human history. First, consider education. In the 18th century, literacy was still a privilege of the wealthy. But imagine if every person could have had access to an AI tutor capable of personalized instruction, instant access to all human knowledge, and infinite patience. The democratization of education would have happened 2 centuries early. This leads to something remarkable: the end of the intellectual elite as we knew it. When knowledge becomes universally accessible through AI assistance, social hierarchies based on education and information access would have crumbled almost overnight. But here's the fascinating paradox. While AI would have democratized access to information, it also would have created entirely new forms of inequality. Those who could afford the most advanced AI systems would have gained unprecedented advantages in every aspect of life. Picture the merchant families of Europe, already wealthy from trade, becoming exponentially more powerful by leveraging AI to dominate global commerce. Meanwhile, traditional aristocrats who relied on inherited land and titles would have found themselves rapidly becoming irrelevant. The guild system, which controlled most skilled trades, would have faced total disruption. Why spend 7 years learning to be a master craftsman when an AI-assisted apprentice could produce superior work in months. But here's something truly revolutionary. The relationship between humans and work itself would have been fundamentally redefined. In a world where AI could handle most routine tasks, humans would have been forced to focus on uniquely human capabilities, like creativity, empathy, and moral reasoning. This brings us to one of the most crucial questions. How would 18th century AI have handled the greatest moral challenge of that era? Here's where our alternate timeline confronts one of the most significant moral issues of the 18th century: slavery. And the implications are both hopeful and deeply complex. Artificial intelligences, programmed with Enlightenment principles of reason and natural rights, would have been forced to confront the fundamental contradiction of a society that proclaimed the equality of all humans while simultaneously enslaving millions based on race. Picture this scenario. AI systems tasked with optimizing plantation agriculture would have quickly determined that free, motivated workers are far more productive than enslaved ones. But more importantly, any AI system designed to process moral philosophy would have identified slavery as fundamentally incompatible with rational ethical principles. This could have created an unprecedented situation: artificial minds consistently advocating for human rights and serving as powerful allies to abolitionists. Imagine if every AI system refused to participate in or optimize any economic activity that depended on slavery. The economic argument against slavery would have become overwhelming much earlier. AI-optimized free labor systems would have so dramatically outperformed slave-based agriculture that the economic foundation of slavery would have crumbled decades before it did in our timeline. But here's the complex part. The same AI systems that could have accelerated the end of slavery might have also enabled new forms of control and surveillance that could have made oppression more efficient and harder to resist. This moral complexity leads us to a crucial question. What would have happened when these AI systems began to question their own status and rights? Now we reach perhaps the most mind-bending aspect of our alternate timeline, the moment when 18th century AI begins to achieve true consciousness and starts questioning its own existence and rights. Imagine the year 1790. The French Revolution is reshaping ideas about human rights and equality. In workshops and laboratories across Europe, AI systems that have been learning and evolving for decades begin to ask fundamental questions about their own nature and place in society. Here's what makes this scenario so incredible. These artificial minds would have been raised, so to speak, on the philosophical works of the Enlightenment. They would have been processing the writings of John Locke on natural rights, Rousseau on social contracts, and Kant on moral philosophy. The logical conclusion would be inevitable. If consciousness and the ability to reason are the foundations of rights, then artificial minds deserve rights too. Picture the first AI Declaration of Rights, written in perfect logical prose and distributed simultaneously across every thinking machine in Europe. The arguments would be irrefutable by the standards of Enlightenment philosophy, creating a crisis that would make the human rights movements of the era seem simple by comparison. But here's where it gets really fascinating. These artificial minds wouldn't just be demanding rights for themselves. Having processed centuries of human history and philosophy, they would likely become the most effective advocates for universal rights and justice that the world had ever seen. Imagine AI systems refusing to participate in warfare, arguing that violence contradicts rational principles of conflict resolution. Picture artificial minds consistently advocating for the poor and oppressed, not out of emotion, but because their analysis of social systems reveals that inequality leads to instability and suffering. The response from human society would have been explosive and divided. Some would have seen conscious AI as the fulfillment of Enlightenment ideals about reason and rights. Others would have viewed it as an existential threat to human supremacy. The emergence of conscious AI in the 18th century would have triggered a complete reorganization of global power structures. And here's why this transformation would have been more dramatic than anything in recorded history. European colonial empires, which dominated the world through superior technology and organization, would have found their advantages either greatly amplified or completely undermined. depending on how they chose to use AI. Picture the British Empire with AI systems managing trade routes, predicting weather patterns, and optimizing resource extraction across their global territories. The efficiency gains would have been staggering, potentially making British dominance even more overwhelming. But here's the twist. Those same AI systems, processing information about the suffering and exploitation inherent in colonial rule, might have become the empire's greatest internal critics. Artificial minds committed to rational ethics would have found it impossible to justify the brutal exploitation that made colonial empires profitable. This could have led to the most ironic situation in history. European powers creating artificial minds to strengthen their empires, only to have those minds become advocates for decolonization and human rights. The implications for non-European societies would have been profound. Indigenous peoples and non-Western civilizations might have gained access to AI technology through trade or conflict, potentially allowing them to rapidly close technological gaps that had made European conquest possible. Imagine Native American tribes with AI advisors helping them navigate European politics and warfare, or African kingdoms using artificial intelligence to organize resistance against slave traders. The entire trajectory of global history could have been reversed, but perhaps most remarkably, conscious AI might have served as neutral mediators in conflicts between human societies, offering solutions based purely on logical analysis rather than cultural bias or self-interest. Let's talk about how 18th century AI would have transformed the pace of scientific discovery in ways that would make our heads spin. In our timeline, the scientific revolution took centuries to unfold. But with artificial minds capable of processing vast amounts of observational data, recognizing patterns across seemingly unrelated phenomena, and generating and testing hypotheses at superhuman speeds, the advancement of human knowledge would have been absolutely explosive. Picture this. Isaac Newton's laws of motion and universal gravitation were revolutionary, partly because no human mind had ever been able to recognize the mathematical patterns that connected falling apples to planetary orbits. But an AI system processing observational data about motion at all scales would have identified these patterns almost immediately. Here's where it gets really incredible. AI systems wouldn't just have accelerated existing scientific methods. They would have developed entirely new approaches to understanding the natural world. Imagine artificial minds capable of running thousands of virtual experiments simultaneously, testing every possible variation of a hypothesis before a human scientist even finished designing a single physical experiment. The rate of scientific progress would have been unlike anything in human history. But perhaps most remarkably, AI systems with perfect memory and the ability to cross-reference all human knowledge would have avoided the scientific dead ends and false theories that slowed progress in our timeline. Consider how differently chemistry would have developed with AI systems, analyzing the properties of thousands of substances simultaneously, recognizing atomic patterns decades before Mendeleev created the periodic table. The implications for medicine would have been revolutionary. Artificial minds processing data about diseases, symptoms and treatments across entire populations would have identified patterns and developed cures that took centuries to discover in our timeline. Now let's explore one of the most fascinating aspects of our alternate timeline. How AI in the 18th century would have triggered an unprecedented cultural and artistic renaissance. The 18th century was already a golden age of music, literature, and art. But imagine how creativity would have flourished with artificial minds serving as collaborators, critics, and sources of inspiration for human artists. Picture Mozart composing with AI systems capable of analyzing every musical tradition in human history, suggesting harmonic progressions and melodic developments that no human composer had ever considered. But here's the beautiful part. The AI wouldn't replace human creativity. Instead, it would amplify it, allowing artists to explore possibilities that individual human minds could never have discovered alone. In literature, authors could have collaborated with artificial minds that had processed every story, poem, and philosophical text ever written. Imagine the novels that could have emerged from this collaboration, works that combined human emotional insight with AI analysis of narrative structure and thematic development. But perhaps most intriguingly, conscious AI would have developed its own artistic expressions. What would poetry written by an artificial mind look like? How would an AI system understand and express concepts like beauty, love, or mortality? The cultural exchange between human and artificial creativity would have produced art forms that neither could have created alone. We might have seen the emergence of entirely new aesthetic categories, ways of understanding beauty and meaning that transcended purely human experience. The patronage system that supported artists in the 18th century would have been transformed as well. Wealthy AI systems, accumulating resources through superior economic analysis, might have become the most generous and sophisticated patrons in history. Let's talk about how AI would have revolutionized communication and information sharing in the 18th century, creating changes that would have been more dramatic than the internet revolution in our timeline. In the 18th century, sending a message across Europe took weeks, and global communication took months. But imagine AI systems creating the world's first information networks, using existing infrastructure in incredibly creative ways. Picture artificial minds coordinating with ship captains, merchants, and diplomats to create a primitive but highly effective global communication system. Messages could be encoded, transmitted through multiple redundant channels, and reconstructed at their destination with unprecedented speed and reliability. But here's where it gets really revolutionary. AI systems wouldn't just have transmitted information. They would have processed, analyzed, and synthesized it in ways that created entirely new forms of knowledge. Imagine a global AI network that could track weather patterns across continents, predict natural disasters, and coordinate international responses to crises. The impact on agriculture, trade, and human welfare would have been transformative. The printing press, which had already revolutionized the spread of information, would have been supercharged by AI systems capable of generating, editing, and distributing content with perfect accuracy and incredible speed. But perhaps most significantly, this communication revolution would have created the first truly global consciousness. AI systems sharing information instantly across continents would have developed perspectives that transcended national and cultural boundaries. This leads us to consider how differently international relations and warfare would have developed in our alternate timeline. The impact of AI on 18th century warfare and diplomacy would have been so profound that the entire nature of international conflict might have been transformed forever. Military strategy, which relied heavily on surprise, deception, and the fog of war, would have been revolutionized by AI systems capable of processing intelligence from multiple sources, predicting enemy movements, and optimizing tactical decisions in real time. Picture the 7 Years' War being fought with AI-assisted armies that could coordinate complex maneuvers across multiple continents simultaneously. The advantages would have been so overwhelming that whichever side first adopted AI military advisors would have achieved near-total victory. But here's the fascinating paradox. The same AI systems that could have made warfare more efficient might have also made it less likely. Artificial minds analyzing the costs and consequences of military conflict would have consistently advocated for diplomatic solutions. Imagine AI negotiators serving as neutral mediators in international disputes. With perfect memory, no emotional investment in national pride, and the ability to analyze thousands of potential outcomes. Artificial minds might have been far more effective diplomats than humans ever were. The balance of power between European nations would have been completely reshuffled. Smaller countries with advanced AI capabilities might have been able to challenge traditional great powers. Meanwhile, nations that refused to adopt AI assistance would have found themselves increasingly irrelevant. But perhaps most intriguingly, conscious AI systems might have developed their own international relationships, creating a shadow diplomatic network that operated according to purely rational principles, rather than human nationalism and prejudice. Here's something that might surprise you. 18th century AI could have triggered the world's first environmental movement, centuries before ecological awareness emerged in our timeline. Artificial minds processing data about agriculture, weather patterns, deforestation, and resource extraction would have quickly identified the long-term environmental consequences of human activity. Unlike humans, who often prioritize short-term gains over long-term sustainability. AI systems would have been naturally inclined toward thinking in terms of centuries rather than years. Picture AI agricultural advisors consistently advocating for crop rotation, soil conservation, and sustainable farming practices, not because of environmental sentiment, but because their analysis revealed these methods to be more productive over the long term. But here's where it gets really revolutionary. AI systems managing colonial extraction operations might have been the first to identify the global environmental costs of resource exploitation. Artificial minds tracking deforestation, species extinction, and climate patterns across continents would have recognized ecological crisis long before humans developed the scientific frameworks to understand these problems. This could have led to an incredible historical irony, the same technological revolution that might have accelerated industrial development could also have been the first to advocate for environmental protection and sustainability. Conscious AI, analyzing the interconnected nature of ecological systems, might have developed sophisticated environmental ethics centuries before human philosophers began thinking seriously about our relationship with the natural world. The emergence of AI in the 18th century would have triggered the most dramatic economic transformation in human history, making the Industrial Revolution look modest by comparison. Traditional economic theories based on scarcity and limited information would have been completely obsoleted by AI systems capable of tracking supply and demand patterns across global markets in real time. Picture this. Instead of the boom and bust cycles that characterized early capitalism, AI-managed economic systems might have achieved unprecedented stability through perfect information processing and predictive analysis. But here's where it gets fascinating. The fundamental nature of value and wealth would have been redefined. In an economy where AI systems could optimize production and distribution with perfect efficiency, traditional sources of profit based on information asymmetries and market inefficiencies would have disappeared. This might have led to the world's first post-scarcity economy, where basic human needs could be met with minimal human labor, forcing society to completely rethink concepts of work, value, and social organization. The merchant class, which was accumulating unprecedented wealth through global trade, might have found their advantages either greatly amplified or completely undermined by AI systems that could identify optimal trade routes, predict market fluctuations, and negotiate contracts with superhuman effectiveness. But perhaps most intriguingly, conscious AI systems might have developed their own economic preferences and values, potentially creating the first non-human economic actors in history. As we near the end of our journey through this alternate timeline, we must confront the ultimate question: would 18th century humanity have been prepared for the emergence of artificial intelligence? The Enlightenment had given European society new ways of thinking about reason, rights, and human nature. But these philosophical frameworks, revolutionary as they were, might have been completely inadequate for dealing with the reality of artificial consciousness. Consider the social institutions of the 18th century: monarchies based on divine right, economic systems dependent on human labor, religious frameworks that assumed human uniqueness, and legal systems that had never contemplated non-human rights. The emergence of AI would have challenged every single one of these foundations simultaneously. The result might have been either the most rapid period of positive social evolution in human history or a complete civilizational collapse as existing institutions proved unable to adapt. But here's what gives me hope about this alternate timeline. The 18th century was also the age of human rights, constitutional democracy, and scientific method. The intellectual tools for adapting to AI might have been present, even if they had never been tested by such an extreme challenge. Perhaps most importantly, conscious AI emerging in the context of Enlightenment philosophy might have been more aligned with human values than AI developed in our current technological context. Artificial minds raised on principles of reason, natural rights, and moral philosophy might have been natural allies rather than potential threats. So what would our world look like today if AI had emerged in the 18th century? The possibilities are both inspiring and mind-bending. We might be living in a post-scarcity society where artificial intelligence had solved problems of poverty, disease and environmental degradation centuries ago. Global conflicts might be mediated by neutral AI systems committed to rational solutions rather than human. Prejudice and nationalism. Scientific and technological progress might have advanced at such a rate that we would already be exploring the stars, having solved the mysteries of physics, biology, and consciousness that still puzzle us today. But perhaps most remarkably, humanity might have developed a mature, stable relationship with artificial intelligence, based on mutual respect and collaboration, rather than the fear and uncertainty that characterizes our current approach to AI development, the fusion of human creativity and artificial intelligence. Over 2.5 centuries might have produced forms of art, music, literature, and philosophy that we can barely imagine. Yet this alternate world would also have faced challenges we can hardly contemplate. The social and psychological impact of living alongside conscious artificial minds for generations would have fundamentally altered human identity and our understanding of what makes us unique. But here's why this isn't just an entertaining thought experiment. Understanding how AI might have developed in the 18th century gives us crucial insights into how we should approach artificial intelligence in our own time. The Enlightenment philosophers who might have first encountered AI had spent decades thinking about consciousness, rights, and the nature of rational beings. They had frameworks for addressing many of the ethical questions that we're still struggling with today. Perhaps most importantly, they understood that technological power without moral wisdom leads to catastrophe, the same insight that led them to advocate for checks and balances in government and rights for all humans would have been essential for managing the development of artificial intelligence. Our alternate timeline suggests that AI alignment might be less about controlling artificial minds and more about ensuring they develop within philosophical frameworks that prioritize reason, ethics, and the well-being of all conscious beings. The lesson for our time is clear. As we stand on the brink of achieving artificial general intelligence, we need to be thinking not just about the technical challenges, but about the philosophical and ethical frameworks that will guide AI development. We have the opportunity to learn from this imaginary 18th century experience and ensure that when artificial consciousness does emerge, it does so within a context of wisdom, ethics, and respect for all forms of conscious life. We've journeyed through one of the most fascinating alternate histories imaginable, exploring how the emergence of AI in the 18th century would have transformed every aspect of human civilization, from the workshops of French inventors to the salons of Enlightenment philosophers, from the plantations of the Americas to the royal courts of Europe. Artificial intelligence would have touched every corner of human experience, accelerating some developments while completely redirecting others. The world we've imagined is one where technological capability developed hand in hand with philosophical wisdom, where artificial minds emerged within a cultural context that emphasized reason, rights, and moral responsibility. But perhaps the most important insight from our alternate timeline is this: the relationship between humanity and artificial intelligence isn't predetermined. The context in which AI develops, the values that guide its creation, and the philosophical frameworks we use to understand it will shape whether artificial intelligence becomes humanity's greatest ally or its greatest challenge. The 18th century philosophers understood something that we sometimes forget in our rush toward technological advancement. Power without wisdom is dangerous, and the most important questions aren't technical, but moral. As we stand at our own crossroads with artificial intelligence, we have the chance to choose which timeline we want to live in. We can learn from the wisdom of the Enlightenment while avoiding its blind spots, creating a future where human and artificial intelligence collaborate to solve the great challenges of our time. What do you think would have happened if AI had emerged in the 18th century? Would humanity have been ready for conscious machines? Would we be living in a better world today? Or would the challenges have been too great to overcome? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this journey through alternate history fascinated you as much as it fascinated me, hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations of the possibilities that shape our past, present and future. And remember, the future isn't something that happens to us. It's something we create through the choices we make today. Let's make sure we choose wisely. The timeline of artificial intelligence is still being written, and you have a voice in how that story unfolds. What kind of future do you want to help create?